Dexter Morgan should have been dead. Arthur Mitchell never left loose ends. He was meticulous, calculated, a serial killer so precise that even the FBI couldn't catch him. His cycle was unbreakable. And yet, when he had Dexter right in front of him, completely vulnerable, he let him walk away. That doesn't make sense. Dexter had infiltrated his life, learned his secrets, gotten dangerously close. Arthur Mitchell wasn't careless. He knew Dexter was a threat. So why didn't he eliminate him? Was it arrogance? A mistake? Or was it something far more disturbing? Most Dexter fans assume Trinity never knew who Dexter really was. But what if that's completely wrong? What if letting Dexter live wasn't a mistake, but a calculated move? And what if, in the end, Trinity got exactly what he wanted? Today, we're breaking down the real reason Trinity never killed Dexter. By the end of this video, you'll never see their relationship the same way again. Arthur Mitchell was not a reckless killer. Every single murder he committed was a calculated step in an obsessive cycle, a reenactment of his own childhood trauma. His ritualistic pattern was not just a method, it was his very identity. A young woman in a bathtub, mirroring his sister's tragic death. A father figure, falling to his doom, just like his own abusive father. A mother, bludgeoned to death, a reflection of his tormented past. These weren't just random victims, they were puzzle pieces in a deeply ingrained psychological framework. But then we have Dexter Morgan, and here's where things stop making sense. Trinity's victims were always helpless. Ordinary people, chosen because they fit his predetermined cycle. They weren't threats, they weren't people who could fight back, and they definitely weren't other killers. Yet Dexter was none of these things. He was an anomaly in Trinity's world. A predator, not prey. So, does that mean Trinity simply didn't see Dexter as a target? That he spared him because he didn't fit into his established pattern? Maybe. But there's a flaw in that logic. Because Trinity didn't just ignore Dexter, he did the exact opposite. He engaged with him. He welcomed him into his life. And here's where it gets disturbing. Arthur Mitchell was a man of control. He manipulated people with ease, from his own family to total strangers. He had spent decades perfecting the art of deception, keeping his true nature hidden behind the facade of a loving husband, a caring father, a charitable community leader. But the second Dexter stepped into his world, there was a shift. Instead of keeping him at a distance, Trinity pulled him in. He let Dexter close, too close. Now, ask yourself, why would one of the most methodical serial killers in history allow a complete stranger into his personal life? A stranger who was clearly investigating him? Who was clearly more intelligent than the average person? Who clearly had his own secrets? This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't just arrogance. This was deliberate. Because here's the thing about Trinity. He was perceptive. He wasn't just a killer. He was a survivor. Someone who had spent his entire life evading capture. He had a sixth sense for danger. So are we really supposed to believe that a man as meticulous as Arthur Mitchell simply missed the warning signs? That he failed to see what made Dexter different? No way. Which leads us to an unsettling possibility. Trinity knew exactly what Dexter was. And instead of running, instead of eliminating him, he wanted him there. But why? Why would a serial killer like Arthur Mitchell let another predator into his orbit? Why not eliminate him before he became a threat? The answer to that question is far more terrifying than you might think, because it suggests that, in Trinity's mind, Dexter wasn't an enemy. He wasn't a victim. He was something else entirely. Trinity and Dexter's first real encounter wasn't just a meeting, it was a recognition. When Arthur Mitchell first laid eyes on Dexter, something clicked. This wasn't just another cop, another nosy stranger poking around his carefully crafted double life. No, Dexter was different. There was something in the way he moved, the way he looked at him. It wasn't suspicion, it was understanding. And that's important. Because Trinity wasn't just a killer, he was a master manipulator. He had spent decades living two lives, learning how to read people, how to avoid being caught. His entire survival depended on it. He had the instincts of a predator, and predators recognize their own. So when he looked at Dexter, did he see something he recognized? Something eerily familiar? It's easy to assume Trinity simply underestimated Dexter, that he was too arrogant to see the danger in front of him. But that doesn't hold up. We're talking about a man who successfully evaded the FBI for 30 years, someone who orchestrated his kills with an obsessive level of detail. You don't survive that long by being careless. And yet, when Dexter entered his world, Trinity didn't just tolerate him, he welcomed him. But let's take this further. Trinity was a serial killer with a strict code of secrecy. He didn't take unnecessary risks. He didn't leave loose ends. He was a perfectionist. So why was Dexter the exception? Why did he choose to interact with him? If you're a serial killer and someone starts snooping around your life, what's the safest move? You cut them off. You push them away. You eliminate the threat before they can expose you. But Trinity did the opposite. He pulled Dexter closer. And this is where things start getting truly disturbing. Trinity didn't see Dexter as a cop or someone investigating him. He saw something else. Maybe even something he had been looking for. Because despite his strict patterns, despite his perfect kills, there was one thing Trinity had never encountered before. Another, him. Think about it. Every serial killer and Dexter operates in their own world. They don't cross paths with others like them. At least, not in a way where both survive long enough to recognize each other. But Trinity? He wasn't just another killer. He was the killer. The one who had been doing it the longest. The one who had perfected his craft. The one who thought he had seen it all. And then, along comes Dexter, a man who looks normal, who acts normal, but who sees Trinity, not with the fear of a civilian, not with the skepticism of a cop, but with the fascination of a predator. For the first time in decades, Trinity wasn't just the hunter. He was being hunted back, and instead of running, instead of panicking, he played along, because maybe he wanted to see how this would end. Arthur Mitchell was a man who needed to believe he was untouchable. His entire worldview was built around control. Control over his family, control over his victims, and most importantly, control over his own legend. He wasn't just another serial killer lurking in the shadows, avoiding capture like an animal on the run. He was something bigger in his own mind, an artist, a mastermind, a force of nature that had been perfecting his craft for decades. And yet, the most dangerous thing about narcissists isn't just their arrogance, it's their blind spots. Because when someone truly believes they are superior, they stop seeing threats. They assume that if they've survived this long, it's because they're simply better than everyone else. And that's exactly what got Trinity killed. From the moment Dexter walked into his life, Trinity assumed he had the upper hand. He thought he was dealing with an ordinary man, maybe someone who was intrigued by him, maybe even someone who admired him. But he failed to recognize that Dexter wasn't just playing along. He was studying him, watching his every move, learning his weaknesses. This is where Trinity made his biggest mistake. He assumed Dexter wanted something from him, a bond, a lesson, a deeper understanding of his methods. Because when you've spent your entire life being the one in control, you start to believe that everyone sees you that way. Trinity had manipulated people for years, his family, his victims, even law enforcement, so he likely assumed Dexter would be just as easy to control. But Dexter wasn't like the others. He wasn't looking for a mentor. He wasn't looking for guidance. He was looking for an opportunity, and Trinity gave him exactly that. What's ironic is that Trinity had been so good at surviving for so long that he forgot what it meant to be hunted. His entire career as a serial killer was built around structure, predictability, a carefully calculated system that allowed him to kill without raising suspicion. But Dexter was chaos. Dexter was adaptable. He didn't follow a strict cycle. He didn't let tradition dictate his methods. He hunted strategically, moving like a ghost through the cracks of Miami's justice system. So, the moment Trinity assumed he was the one pulling the strings, he had already lost. He believed he had all the power, when in reality, Dexter had been slowly dismantling his world from the inside. And this is what truly makes Trinity's failure so fascinating. He didn't lose because he was weaker than Dexter. He lost because he never even realized he was playing the same game. By the time Trinity understood who Dexter really was, it was too late. He had already let him in. He had already underestimated him. And as history has proven time and time again, when one serial killer underestimates another, they don't live long enough to regret it. Arthur Mitchell was a master manipulator, a man who didn't just kill, he orchestrated. Every move, every decision, every interaction had a purpose. So, are we really supposed to believe that he didn't see through Dexter's disguise? That he, a serial killer who had evaded capture for 3 decades, couldn't sense the darkness lurking beneath Dexter's carefully controlled exterior? It's unlikely. In fact, it's almost absurd. And that brings us to a disturbing possibility. What if Trinity knew everything all along? What if he let Dexter into his world? Not because he was fooled, but because he was playing his own game. Think about the moment Trinity utters those chilling words. It's already over. That wasn't panic. That wasn't fear. That was a victory statement. Because while Dexter stood there, knife in hand, believing he had won, Trinity had already delivered the ultimate blow. So let's unpack this. If Trinity truly knew what Dexter was, that means every interaction between them was more than just manipulation. It was warfare. Silent, psychological, and far more brutal than any physical confrontation. Because what Trinity did to Dexter wasn't just an attack, it was devastation. Dexter had spent his entire life carefully constructing his world, making sure that no one, not even those closest to him, could truly see what he was. But then came Trinity, a man who, for the first time, forced Dexter to play by his rules. He led him on a chase, lured him into a false sense of control, and then struck where it hurt the most, not at Dexter himself, but at his one true weakness, his family. And here's the real kicker. If Trinity did know, that means Rita's death wasn't just a random act of vengeance. It wasn't just Trinity going after Dexter's loved ones because he figured out he was a threat. No, it was a strategic move, a checkmate. Because what Trinity did wasn't just about killing someone Dexter loved. It was about dismantling everything Dexter thought he was. For years, Dexter believed he was untouchable, that he could balance both sides of his life, the killer and the family man, without consequence, that he could have a wife, a child, a normal existence, all while continuing to kill in secret. But Trinity exposed that illusion for what it was. He proved to Dexter that he was never safe. That the second he let his guard down, the second he believed he could have both worlds, it would all come crashing down. So when Trinity looked Dexter in the eyes and said, "It's already over," he wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about Dexter's life as he knew it. Because in that moment, Trinity wasn't the one who had lost. He had already won. He had done something that no other serial killer, no other enemy, had ever been able to do. He had broken Dexter Morgan. Arthur Mitchell was a different kind of killer. Most murderers operate on instinct, on compulsion, on the sheer need to destroy, but not Trinity. He was deliberate, calculated. Everything he did had purpose, and every victim he took served a function in his deeply ingrained cycle. But Rita wasn't part of that cycle. She wasn't a random woman he picked because of his rituals. She was something much, much more sinister. She was a message, because Trinity knew exactly what she meant to Dexter. He had spent enough time around him to recognize the facade, to see past the forced smiles, the carefully rehearsed interactions. He knew that Dexter wasn't a normal man, not in the way he pretended to be. But he also knew something even more important. Dexter wanted to be normal. He was trying. He was building a life, a family, a reality where he could be more than just the dark passenger lurking inside him. And that's exactly what Trinity destroyed. Let's talk about how he did it. The method wasn't random. He could have killed Rita in a rage. He could have bludgeoned her like the other women in his cycle. But no, he made it intimate. He made it quiet. He made sure it was in a bathtub, a method that he reserved only for the first kill in his cycle, the one that mimicked his own sister's death. Think about what that means. Trinity didn't just kill Rita. He made Dexter live out his trauma. He forced Dexter to walk into that bathroom and see the same horrifying image that haunted Trinity himself for decades. A woman he loved, lifeless in a pool of blood, her death completely out of his control. That's not just murder, that's psychological destruction. But there's another layer to this. Trinity could have killed Rita at any time. He had access. He knew where she lived, but he waited. And here's the most chilling part. He did it after Dexter had already killed him. Trinity knew he was about to die. He had lost. He was staring into the eyes of his own killer. But instead of begging for his life, instead of making a last attempt to escape, he smiled. And then he said those words. "It's already over." And that's because he knew something Dexter didn't. He knew that, even in death, he had won. Because Trinity understood something about Dexter that no one else had figured out yet. Dexter wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing control. He was afraid of being powerless. And by taking Rita, by waiting until the very last moment to strike, Trinity ensured that Dexter's victory would never feel like a win. Because when Dexter walked into that bathroom and saw what had been done, it didn't matter that Trinity was gone. It didn't matter that he had won the fight. Because at that moment, he realized something far worse. Trinity was still in control. Even in death, he had delivered the most devastating kill of all. He had taken away the only thing that tethered Dexter to his humanity. That wasn't just revenge, that was the ultimate checkmate. If Arthur Mitchell had made the decision to kill Dexter, the entire story of Dexter would have taken a drastically different turn. But here's the real question. Would he have actually succeeded? At first glance, Trinity seemed like the perfect opponent. Intelligent, disciplined, methodical, and completely without remorse. He had spent decades killing without being caught, fooling everyone around him, including his own family. If anyone could have taken Dexter down, it was him. But here's where things get complicated. Because while Trinity was an expert at executing his ritualistic murders, Dexter was an expert at something far more important: survival. There's a fundamental difference between the two. Trinity killed because he was compelled to. His cycle wasn't just a routine, it was an obsession. A pattern deeply ingrained in his psyche. Every kill had to follow his established sequence: a young woman in a bathtub, a father figure falling to his death, and a mother bludgeoned with a hammer. He didn't stray from this method. He couldn't stray from it. That's what made him so effective, but also what made him predictable. Dexter, on the other hand, wasn't confined by compulsions. He adapted. He evolved. His survival didn't depend on following a rigid set of rules. It depended on manipulating the world around him. That's why he had outmaneuvered law enforcement for years. That's why, time and time again, he had walked away unscathed while others met their demise. So, if Trinity had decided to strike first, the outcome would have depended entirely on when he made his move. If he had realized early on that Dexter was a predator just like him, if he had abandoned his cycle and gone after Dexter with no hesitation, then maybe he could have had the upper hand. Unlike most of Dexter's past enemies, Trinity wasn't sloppy. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't reckless. He was careful, strategic, and experienced. He knew how to navigate through life without raising suspicion. That's what made him so dangerous in the first place. He didn't make the kind of mistakes that got people like Miguel Prado or the ice truck killer caught. He was a ghost, a man who had perfected the art of killing and disappearing into plain sight. But here's where things shift. The moment Trinity engaged with Dexter, the moment he let him in, he had already sealed his fate. Because Dexter wasn't just observing him for fun, he was studying him, analyzing every habit, every weakness, every move. Unlike Trinity, who was bound by his compulsions, Dexter could change the game whenever he needed to. He could adjust his tactics. He could become whatever the situation required him to be. He was a shapeshifter, someone who could blend in and strike at the perfect moment. Now, let's imagine an alternate scenario where Trinity actually tried to eliminate Dexter. Maybe he realized too late that Dexter wasn't just some naive admirer. Maybe he started to feel that same eerie recognition that Dexter felt towards him, an understanding that they weren't so different, that Dexter wasn't there to learn from him, but to destroy him. If Trinity had acted on that instinct and gone on the offensive, what would have happened? The truth? Trinity might have had the upper hand, temporarily. Unlike most of Dexter's enemies, Trinity was older, but physically strong. He was relentless. And let's not forget, he had a family that he was fiercely protective of. That means he wouldn't have fought alone. Unlike Dexter, who had spent years keeping his true nature hidden from those around him, Trinity had an entire household of people who would have defended him without question. If Dexter had gone missing, Kyle Butler, the alias he had used to infiltrate Trinity's world, would have immediately become a prime suspect in the Mitchell household. But even with all of that in his favor, there was one problem. Trinity was predictable. His patterns, his movements, his rituals, Dexter had already figured them out. And once you become predictable in Dexter's world, you're already dead. Let's take a moment to imagine how this scenario could have unfolded. If Trinity had tried to ambush Dexter, he wouldn't have done it randomly. He would have planned it. Maybe he would have lured Dexter into an environment where he had the upper hand, perhaps an isolated construction site, where he often carried out his bludgeoning murders. Maybe he would have set a trap, playing the role of the helpless victim one last time before turning the tables. But here's the thing. Dexter wasn't just physically stronger than he appeared. He was smarter. He was more calculated. He anticipated threats before they happened. He had been trained since childhood to detect danger before it struck. That's why, time and time again, he was able to take down men who, on paper, should have been more powerful than him. And in the end, that's why Trinity would have lost. Because while Trinity was following the same cycle he had been trapped in for decades, Dexter was breaking patterns, rewriting rules, and adapting to every challenge thrown his way. Trinity was a creature of habit, but Dexter was a creature of survival. And that's why Trinity is dead, and Dexter lived long enough to tell the tale. Arthur Mitchell believed he had played the perfect game. He thought that by sparing Dexter, by keeping him close and striking where it hurt the most, he had achieved the ultimate victory. In his mind, Dexter wasn't just another loose end. He was a pawn in a much bigger scheme. Trinity didn't see Dexter as someone he needed to kill, because in his eyes, he had already defeated him in a far crueler way. Killing Dexter would have been too easy, too clean, too merciful. But taking away the illusion of a normal life, destroying the fragile balance Dexter had spent years constructing, that was true punishment. But here's where Trinity's plan backfired completely. He assumed that by breaking Dexter emotionally, he would destroy him entirely. What he failed to understand was that Dexter wasn't like him, not in the way that really mattered. Yes, they were both killers, but unlike Trinity, Dexter had the ability to adapt. He had spent his whole life surviving, reinventing himself, and slipping through the cracks of a world that should have swallowed him whole. Trinity lost because he was bound by his own cycle, incapable of seeing beyond it. He thought he was writing the final chapter of Dexter's story, but in reality, he was just another obstacle, one that Dexter would ultimately overcome. Because while Dexter may have lost Rita, he didn't lose himself. And in the world of killers, the one who can evolve, the one who can keep going, is the one who truly wins. Arthur Mitchell thought he had won. In his mind, leaving Dexter alive wasn't a mistake. It was the final move in his twisted game. But what he failed to realize was that Dexter wasn't like his past victims. He wasn't trapped in a cycle, he adapted, he survived, and in the end, that's why Trinity is dead, and Dexter lived long enough to tell the tale. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.